If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com, download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
This is Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where the crime scene is a boardroom and the preferred weapon is a convoluted spreadsheet. I'm Caleb Newquist.
And I'm Greg Kyte. Caleb, how would you feel about us kicking things off by reading a review, a very timely 1-star review?
Ooh, wow. So no chaser. Okay. Yeah, sure. I love a timely 1-star review.
Awesome. This one comes from Apple Podcasts from a listener whose screen name is Waka 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 Waka.
What, like Fozzie Bear Waka Waka?
That's what it looks like to me. It looks like he's a big Muppet. He or she is a big Muppets fan. Waka 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 says, quote, wish they'd leave their politics out. Loved right up until they opened up about politics. 1 star.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell if Waka 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 doesn't like our politics, or maybe they're just generally sick of politics.
Yeah.
What do you think, Greg?
I think both are viable options because I don't like our politics and I'm generally sick of politics. So
right.
could be either, but regardless, it's a great trigger warning for this episode because we're talking to a former Halliburton employee, and it's impossible to talk about Halliburton without talking about politics in some way, shape, or form.
So, if you may be triggered by mild, snowflake, progressive political statements, then it might be better for you to skip this episode and instead go back and listen to episode 52, where we talk about money laundering and the Watergate scandal. There's absolutely no politics in that episode at all.
Zero. I think we got through that one without even mentioning the Republican Party. If you hate our So if you hate our politics, or even if you just hate politics in general, please leave us a rating and a review on your favorite podcast platform.
Yes, and we'll also take this moment to mention that we do keynote addresses at events and conferences. And don't worry, we're professionals. We can work clean. And we can work clean.
Yeah.
No swears.
Full stop. We also do in-house training if you've got that at your firm. If you want more info on pricing and availability, send us an email at ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com.
Okay. So, Greg, you tipped our hand a little bit.
Yeah.
This episode is an interview, and it is with a former Halliburton employee, a former Halliburton employee that is kind of famously known as the accountant who beat Halliburton, and that will all be explained in the conversation. But his name is Anthony J. Menendez. He goes by Tony, so that's what you'll hear us call him during the show. And Greg, this was a great interview. I know you think it was a great interview, but I'll just prompt you by saying this was a great interview.
I loved it. So fun because he was the interview, and we've talked about that before. This podcast, we made it because we love telling stories about frauds, and in this case, we get to hear the story of some fraud, but it's got some twists and turns, and it does not end the way that you think it'll end. But it's very interesting, very engaging, and Tony's a stand-up guy. I mean,
he is.
We were impressed with that, but you'll see that when you listen to our interview with Tony Menendez.
So, Tony, thanks for coming on.
That's my pleasure. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, good. The way we usually start these things is we ask people to start at the beginning, and where you grew up, what your parents did, whether you were bullied or not, your any early signs of accounting aptitude. So let's start there.
Oh geez. Okay, yeah. I was born in St. Louis. We moved to Houston, Texas when I was pretty young. My dad had an 8th grade education. that's about as high as he got. And he said he'd had to cheat to get through that or whatever. So he wasn't much of an academic, but he was a hard worker. He had a bunch of restaurants for a while and ended up losing them because the guy he trusted with his finances or whatever. So there's some kind of story there. But anyhow, so then he had a small little construction company, and my mom, when we moved to Houston, she loved school. Like she just went to school her entire life, and she ended up getting her master's degree, and she worked at the University of Houston. So I always had that. Like she would take me on excavation, digs and Indian reservations, things like that. It really gave me a passion for like reading and so forth. But I grew up.
So was she an anthropologist then?
No, she just was like a lifelong student. She would just take all kinds of classes that she liked. Like she just went to school forever. That. And one of the benefits of she worked at the University of Houston. And so all I knew growing up is I wanted to play baseball. Like that was always, I thought I just play baseball. And when I realized, I'm not gonna play baseball, I got to figure out, what I'm going to do. And at this time I was in college, and I had a girlfriend who got pregnant. So all of a sudden I was like, wow, I got a family I had to take care of, and I was waiting tables. And I was actually really, really terrible at that. So there was no real future in it. And
no real future in the food service.
Not at all. Like
area.
I just could never remember. I mean, it was just a mess. I'm just a mess. But I had already, was already in school, and I started taking classes in anthropology, geology. So I really wanted to be if I couldn't be a baseball player, I wanted to be like a geologist or a paleontologist. And, and I liked comic books growing up, and, and all this. But anyhow, when that happened, I was like, well, I got to find a job. How am I going to get out? So I went down to career counseling, and they had two lists, right? And at the top was the most jobs, accounting major, right? And the most pay, accounting. So I was like, I'll try that, even though I had absolutely zero interest in business, and nothing about accounting. Like we didn't know any professionals or nothing like that. Like there were no accountants in my family. I was the first one to graduate college other than my mom. That's because she just did it for 50 years. But anyhow, so I got into accounting, and I was like, I like this. I kind of like the logic of it. It kind of started to make sense to me. And then what really sold me on was it's a real profession. Like they instilled in me like how important it is, right? You're not just a professional, right? You're part of a profession, and you're kind of upholding the integrity of the markets. And that stuff really kind of resonated with me as a kid that fell in love with the comic books and fantasy, and just, I always felt like, I want to do something meaningful, right? So in some ways, I just kind of gravitated toward that, and turns out I was actually pretty good with it.
Cool. And I get that too, because it does seem like Captain America could have been an accountant, really. when you think about if the Tony Stark's like injections didn't take, or his dad's injections didn't take, he might have wound up as an internal audit or somewhere.
And that shield would have come in handy too, for sure.
Right. Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of challenges associated with it, right? But that was kind of also part of it. It's like, with great power comes great responsibility, right? The famous quote from Peter Parker's Uncle Ben. And so, I don't know. I just had this naivete about me all my life, and but I did like accounting, and so after college, I went to work at Ernst & Young, and I was in the emerging growth markets, and I really liked the work, right? I loved going from client to client and having to get in there and identify, well, what are the issues, what are the risks, how do we respond, just learning, And I was in this group that was very, very dynamic, the entrepreneurship, emerging growth type companies, where the partners rolled up their sleeves, and it was just a great environment. It really suited me. And
that was in the Houston office.
I was in the Houston office, yeah. And then something happened in the profession with around the late 2000s, all the frauds, right? The Enrons and WorldComs and Tycos and things you guys have probably covered. But it all of a sudden just had a seismic shift on the profession, and all of a sudden they passed Sarbanes-Oxley, and because we really did kind of go awry, we had the pendulum had swung too far, with auditors playing too much of a advocate role, in many ways, and so a reckoning was due, right? And And I think as a profession, I kind of also bought into that, like the importance of Sarbanes-Oxley and what we had kind of gone astray. We need to right in the ship. And those were the messaging coming down from the firm. But it also came with it a lot of other challenges in the profession, in the firm environment, right? Because all of a sudden it was just massive amounts of work to do all this internal control testing. And so the group I was in, this group that I love to be in, was actually kind of getting disbanded, right? Because the firm's like, well, we got to take care of these big clients. We got to move away from smaller clients. And so we started being disbanded and all being put on large engagements. And all of a sudden I found myself kind of going, what do I want to do? I'm not really that excited about it. I really like what I do. And the thing is, and for me, like, I was always in the moment. Like, I was never one of those people that thought about my career 5 years, 10 years down, right? I was always just in the moment, right? And very reactionary and in some ways immature in that way, maybe too, right? Maybe I should have looked more of a longer
when you were asked
lens.
when you were asked where do you see yourself in 5 years,
Yeah.
you were like, I don't know, but today's cool. Is that sort of the
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just
but I'm happy now. So does that count for anything?
Yeah. So probably a little bit of a flaw professionally, but maybe it just kind of goes with my whole persona or whatever. But anyhow, so then I got this strange call from a company, from a recruiter, and he's like, hey, you come highly recommended. We've had several people say you'd be perfect for this role. And he told me about the role. I was like, wow, this is a great role. It's in a big, highly recognizable public client, international company, rep. But he wouldn't give me the name of the company, right? And the role was great, right? You're going to step in and be the, kind of the arbiter of the accounting, right? You're going to be in there making sure the company is doing the accounting right, working with the auditors. Basically a role that was born out of Sarbanes-Oxley, right?
Okay.
Because recognizing the need that public companies were relying too heavily on their auditors kind of created this niche need, right? So companies had to hire expertise internally. So when they have an accounting problem, they don't turn to the auditors, they go internally. So that was my role, right? To really be that buffer and to fill that hole that we all recognize existed from Sarbanes-Oxley. And so anyhow, I was very...
And was that specifically, because I remember, Sarbanes-Oxley, it was passed in 2002. There was tons of brand new requirements. I felt like everybody was kind of freaking out about it, especially in industry, having to comply with it. It sounds like your experience in public accounting at Ernst & Young was that it was more like, oh, this is some, it sounds like it was more embraced more quickly than maybe in industry. But industry, I felt like a lot of people just going, how the hell do we do this? And so it sounds like your role was the answer to how the hell do we do this?
It was part of a crafted solution that a lot of like-minded companies came up with, and Halliburton being one of them. And I didn't know it was Halliburton at the time. Again, like, he kept withholding it from me. But also, I don't think it was just totally altruistic. I mean, that was the messaging coming from the firm, but the firm was also like, saw dollar signs, right?
Yep.
I mean, this is, now all of a sudden every big public company is going to have to revamp all their internal controls. We're going to have to audit that stuff. So that was really the reason for breaking up the group, because they're like, hey, we'll make more money on all this stuff with internal controls that we didn't have to do before than we will on all these other engagements. So, it was just to balance that out. But anyhow, so I was like, he wouldn't tell me the company. And so he's like, oh, how about I take you to lunch? Taking lunch, tell you a little bit more about it. And I'm like,
did you have any guesses as what the company was?
No, I had no idea.
You weren't trying to go, who could be a big international company with lots of exposure and
none, right?
You were like going, is it Gap Inc? Am I going to be making pants?
No, I mean, I didn't, because I didn't. Again, that's probably me just in the moment, not thinking.
Right. That would have been me the whole time. I would have been trying to
in your defense, Tony, like, recruiters have always been cagey. Like, they're super cagey about that stuff. So that's because, I don't know, they just they don't want, and my wife used to work in legal recruiting, same kind of thing, where depending on who the employer is, the employer may or may not be a deal breaker. Like, if it's super prominent and prestigious, people might get, but they might be underqualified. Or maybe it was some, lost progressive in Houston, Texas, and they hear Halliburton, and they're like, nah, I'm not working there, And so But anyway, so
Yeah.
the
Well, yeah.
caginess that you're describing doesn't actually
Yeah,
surprise
and
me.
it really does. I probably should have been a little more skeptical, but I met with them. I was like, yeah, free lunch
Yeah.
and learn more about it. I did really like the position, and he goes on and on. He's going on and on about the chief accounting officer that is in the role now, and all the efforts they're making to make it this world-class finance organization, and so forth and so on. And really kind of sold me on the position. And finally, he's like, "All right, come on, can you tell me now with the company?" And he's like, "Oh, it's Halliburton." And I was immediately like, thanks, but no thanks. Like, you got to understand where Halliburton was at the time. I mean, their name was basically synonymous with corporate malfeasance or whatever, right? It's just, you understand,
Right.
Dick Cheney was the vice president. They were under all kinds of investigations for bribery, FCPA, and then the Iraq War. They had all those contracts. In fact, there's a joke, and I'll share it. It's the Jay Leno joke. They had said, because this came out around that same time, and they had said, Jay Leno had said, "Hey, they caught Saddam Hussein the other day, and he had $750,000 in his pocket, right, when they captured him." And then he said, "Well, this is the way Jay Leno said. He said, well, what they were trying to do was he wanted to buy 3 gallons of gas from Halliburton." So anyhow, it was kind of synonymous,
Right.
and at the same time,
definitely baggage with Halliburton. I mean, even now, there's still just this whole so much.
Absolutely. So I also I didn't go and totally. So I was like, no way, that's okay. I want to stay away. But then he kept telling me about McCollum and the things they're trying to do, and that's the key. They're trying to change their perception and turn it around. It's nothing like the media, so forth. And I said, all right, well, I'll give that a chance. But let me give you some other than the anecdotal Jay Leno joke. The Wall Street Journal each year would put out their public perceptions of public companies, right? So we rank the top 60 and the bottom 60, right? The top, your Coca-Colas and your, I don't know,
and your Gap Inc.
Whatever. Companies that really have great reputation. And at the very bottom, so the bottom 60, Halliburton was, I think they were 58.
Right. Wow.
58.
58. So 58 out of 60. So just below them was that whatever that company was that did all the like OxyContin.
Well, let me tell you who it was. Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco.
There you go. There you go.
No.
So, those companies are all embroiled in fraud, scams, and bankrupt, and their executives are all in prison. And right above that is the company that I'm considering to work for. And the thing is, I was very skeptical, but I said, look, I'll make the commitment. I'll meet this. You speak so highly of him, and I did. And I met with the gentleman. His name was Martin Cullum, and we were simpatical on the role, the importance of the role, and what he was trying to do. And his whole thing was he wanted to hire Smokey the Bear, right? That was, if you guys remember Smokey the Bear, the old iconic advertising campaign to prevent forest fires. And so I kind of got a kick out of that, because that's what I need you to do, is being here to prevent forest fires and keep my name out of the Wall Street Journal. We got to be above reproach and blah, blah, blah. So anyhow, I really was sold when I met with him and decided to take the job.
And what year was this?
This was in 2005. Yeah, okay. February 2005.
Yeah, so like definitely at that point in time, like Halliburton is kind of like the chief boogeyman.
Oh yeah.
For, in political circles.
Oh,
like
for sure. Right. That's why
they were
just right above Enron and WorldCom. And they were in the news every day, right?
But if I may just kind of like set the stage for like but Halliburton, because I remember being, a young, and my politics haven't changed, but like I remember being young and progressive and reading about Halliburton and being like, oh yeah, they're the bad guys, this and that, whatever. But what my conservative friends educated me about very quickly was that Halliburton was, in terms of like what they did, their businesses, they were like the only game in town. Like certain things within the energy industry, Halliburton had the best. They had the best people. They had the best engineers. They had the best geologists. They had the best business for like energy services. And so that's why in a lot of cases they were sought out
Yeah.
to do a lot of these big jobs.
Oh, very true. Like they have real skills. There's some really talented people, and over the years they've come up with a lot of really great inventive ways to do things. And they're not the only game in town. There's Schlumberger and Baker Hughes, and there's others, but yeah, they're one of the premier oilfield service companies.
Right.
And
nobody's heard about those guys. They're nowhere
Yeah,
near
yeah.
number 58 out of the bottom 60 companies with reputations.
Yeah.
I want to know, before you took the job, were you like, you know what? I want to take this job, but before I do it, I just want to go hunting with one of the executives. Did you say that? Was that part of the pitch?
The news
No,
hadn't
okay.
broken yet about his hunting skills. But no, I didn't. And of course, this was 2005, and he was already the vice president. So,
Okay.
I never interacted with him. I didn't.
Yeah, gotcha.
Didn't get a
Gotcha.
chance.
So you must have so when you decided to take the job, I mean, you were jazzed. You were real excited
Oh,
to
yeah.
like I mean, yeah.
I ran with the whole Smokey the Bear thing. Like I used it
of
in my
course.
initial meeting to folks. Hey, what we're here to do, and even Mark
Right.
would chime in at the big staff meeting. Say, yeah, we have this new group, and we're going to elevate the technical competencies around here, and people are we're going to focus on training and development, and
Only you can prevent
that's right.
accelerated income
That's
revenue recognition.
That's
Is
right,
that-
right.
is that-
Yeah.
Nice.
So I hit the ground running, and fascinating enough, I get there and people are like, oh wow, we got a new direction. Okay, hey, by the way, I've been worried about this thing and that thing, and people started bringing issues to me. And the first thing they brought to me was the joint venture. They brought it to me, and they said, hey, we're kind of concerned about the accounting here, and look at it, and it's like, oh well, you have every right to be. It looks something very, very sketchy going on here, and don't want to get into too much of the accounting details, but I took it to my boss, and he's like, yeah, this smells like fraud, and take it to the other guy. And we ended up writing it off, right? Because we said, hey, it's worthless, without getting into too many details. And we said, okay, all right, good. That's a win. Like, it's a win. Like we're doing what we're hired to do. We're cleaning up things and getting kudos. And next guy comes, he says, hey, I got another one. It reminded me this other thing. I got another one that's very similar, right? Except for it's a little worse. It's twice as big, and I'm like, all right. So we look at it, and it needs to be written off. But this time the reaction to write it off is a little more pushback, right? Whereas before it was like immediate, write that off. It's just wrong. And then this time I was like, can we find a ways? And ultimately couldn't find any way. And so we wrote it off. Unbeknownst to me, behind the scenes, there was getting a little less tolerance to these type of things. And another one comes my way, and look at it, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this one's a problem too. So it was like 3 for 3. Like it was a strikeout right off the bat. And I go to my boss right at the time who hired me, wanted to be a Smokey the Bear. And I'm like, Mark, we just had those two. I said, we got this other joint venture error. And he's like, we're not looking at that joint venture error, and tells me just to stay away from it. And I said, the only reason I'm looking at it is because the auditors asked me to look at it because they were concerned about it. So I'm not, he's like, you're not an auditor, right?
Yeah.
He's like, you're not an auditor. You're not supposed to be, it's not your job. And I'm like, I thought I was doing my job. I didn't go and look for this. They brought it to me. And
listen, Tony, your job is to look like we're concerned about this, not to actually find shit. Okay.
That's
So
right.
just say a lot of accounting words and Smokey the Bear, and then just go back to your office and play some Tetris, man.
Yeah. It's like smoke screen instead of Smokey the Bear.
Right.
Because the words that came out of his mouth shortly after that was, look, you're not an auditor. And he said, I said, well, look, we're just correcting past mistakes. Like, for example, FiberSpar. He's like, FiberSpar, let me tell you what. You just destroyed, I think it was $15 million or whatever. He said, we had to write FiberSpar off. He's like, you just destroyed $15 million worth of shareholder value by getting that kind of. And I was stunned. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, we don't just, I said, we had to get it right. And he's like, well, we just don't take hits around here. Right? We got to fight taking hits. Right. And that hit was $15 million, wiped out shareholder value. And I said, look, I'm just doing my job. He's like, no, I expect people to fight taking hits. And if they don't, I'd fire them. Right. So on no certain terms, like stop looking at joint ventures, stop, go back and like you suggested. And So that's when things started I started having my regrets about taking the role.
And how long had you been there at this point?
Geez, by
like this
that
all
time,
happened really fast, right?
Super fast. Those two conversations were, let's say all that happened around May, late May. So 2 months in, right?
3 days, because day one was the little write-up, day two was the little bit bigger, and day three was the hey, shut the fuck up write-up, right?
Essentially, yeah, it happened super fast, and unfortunately at the time, right around the time he was also telling me to stay away from the joint ventures, that I'm not an auditor and so forth. And then that's when I said, hey, well, we got a bigger problem that I'm concerned about, that came to my attention, how they're recognizing revenue on bill and hold.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when things started to really take a turn for the worse. And at first she's like, look, I don't care. Just rely on what was going on last year. I don't want you looking at it. And I said, well, this isn't a past thing. They're asking me to approve a current contract to recognize revenue. And that's kind of my job, right? I'm not being an auditor. I got to give them guidance on this contract. And what I'm telling you is I can't tell them they can recognize revenue because they don't meet any of the bill and hold criteria. And he's like, well, how much is that contract? And I said, I don't know. I think it's this quarter they're saying it's $3 to $5 million, and they might miss their targets if they don't recognize it. He's like, oh shit, I don't care about $3 or $5 million. Here's what I want you to do. You can work on that one contract and that one contract only. Then I don't want you dealing with this anymore. Don't go looking in the past. Just accept what they've done. And at that point, I was like, okay, alarm bells going off, because the thing is, that was one contract, and which was really a representative of all their contracts, right? This wasn't an isolated contract. The issue was, and I even told him, I said, I'm not worried about this one contract. I'm worried about what it does to all of our contracts, because I'm told this is what they do all over the globe, right?
Yeah.
And
and before we get too deep, can I just, I want to make sure that I understand, and by the whole bill and hold situation, and hopefully that's also a good way to make sure that the listeners also understand the issue that we're up against here. So the way I've read just this problem that you had at Halliburton, it was kind of like if someone's like building a home, you're building a new home. So you get a contract with a contractor, and you know exactly how much you're going to pay them. They know exactly how much they're going to get paid for building this home. But according to the accounting standards, they can't just recognize all that revenue as soon as the ink's dry on the contract. They have to recognize the revenue over time, depending on how much of the job is completed over time, and then they can recognize part of the revenue there. And if there's some, in terms of, are they receiving cash on it? How far are they along? Yeah. And ultimately the idea is really you don't get to recognize all the revenue until the product is shipped. Is that similar to what we're dealing with at Halliburton?
Well, I mean, it's similar. Let me change it up a little bit. Let's just say you won't recognize revenue until you deliver the home, right?
Okay.
So let's say you've got a contract to build a home, or $10 million, $2 million home or whatever, and essentially what you do is you go out and acquire all the lumber and nails and you put them in your warehouse, you let them sit there. And essentially what they're doing is recognize the revenue when that happens.
Okay.
Right. They're not. And so the thing here is the home.
We got all the pieces. We got all the pieces of the house. So we're good, right?
Yes. But we just got to put them together for you and test it, make sure everything's whatever. We just have to do that part. Not a big deal.
Okay.
And so, and the thing is, unlike a home, right? So you buy a home, you want it built, right? So it's kind of like you're going to start construction right away. Whereas the issue with these guys is they just know there's oil and gas out in the Gulf of Mexico, right?
Okay.
They haven't found it yet, right? So they just know they've got a plan to go out in the Gulf of Mexico or wherever and search for it. And so you got to have all these pieces of the home ready for whenever, hey, all of a sudden we found it, right? And then you're going to build the home to the specs necessary to make that drill, right? It's not like I'm not building a standardized home. Like I gotta construct the equipment and the tools necessary for that depth of that well, right? The temperature, the pressure, all the other complicated engineering things that go into it. Yeah. So if you really step back and this is why it's the key difference here is because what their business really is they go and provide all those services, right? Yes, they have this equipment and stuff that they have to manufacture and put together, because they're the ones that have to use that stuff in the wells, right? The large oil companies, they don't get dirty. You ever seen the Horizon movie where they had the huge mess up, whatever? The guys getting all grimy and stuff. Those are Halliburton guys. The Exxons and the Shells, they're back here going, hey, my job is to find the well. I'm paying you guys to get it out of there safely
pump it out,
and all that, right?
Do the dirty work.
So the real work they do is that, right? Providing the oil field services. So the customer doesn't care about, having all the components and all the junk over here. They care about this, right? So that's kind of thing.
And also the problem, like I guess the motivation for Halliburton, again, this is me just spelling it out. The motivation for Halliburton of what you want to, they're motivated to recognize the revenue earlier rather than later, because if you're a publicly traded company like Halliburton is, you've got these market analysts who are giving their projections and saying, hey, Halliburton should make this much money this year. And so they're trying to go, hey, if we can recognize this revenue earlier, it's going to help us meet market expectations, which is going to keep our share prices higher. Back to your point about the $15 million the write-off destroyed $15 million worth of shareholder value. So that's sort of the motivation to keep things light, maybe of how things got to where they were with Halliburton.
Yes. So this is a key distinction. The policy as that, by doing it that way, it gives them total control over the timing of the revenue.
There you go.
Right. Yeah. Because this is the thing. They're the ones, let's say they're manufacturing the piece of equipment, and their revenue recognition is when it leaves the manufacturing facility and goes to a warehouse. Right. Mm-hmm. And so they have total control over when that happens, because like I'm saying, these contracts are maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years, whatever out, right? So in terms of when it goes to the warehouse, it's irrelevant, right? And it's totally in control of the company. And again, it's completely irrelevant from the standpoint of those guys because they don't really care about it.
Right. So if there's a quarter or a year where you've already hit market expectations, then you go, okay, we don't have to worry about that now. We'll hang on to that for later. But if you're not quite there, then you might accelerate. You might, like you said, just move stuff from here to this warehouse where it's still from Halliburton to Halliburton. Yeah. Then you go, now we can recognize the revenue because we need it now. That's sort of, it's income smoothing is really
absolutely
income smoothing, income management.
Absolutely. Sort of and thing is, I wasn't alone on this. Like the guy that was there before me, and he was in a different role. His name was J.R. Salt. He was the controller over the ESG, which is the energy business. And he's the one that came to me and said, hey, I've got real concerns about what's going on here. And so in addition to the little arrangement I said they also do services where they'll use all these chemicals, right? Called Bayrite and other things. And they got to use these chemicals to go down the well. And the contracts are, they're going to recognize revenue as soon as the bags go to the warehouse. Okay. But who determines how many bags you need? Well, Halliburton does. And the contract is, the customer doesn't care because you only get charged for the bags used. Right. So Halliburton can at the end of the quarter go, oh, let's ship extra bags. We need the revenue. And the customer doesn't care because if you don't use them, they're going to get it charged back.
Oh,
and so he was actually walking around this big warehouse in Kazakhstan. And this is when I first got there. He was telling me a story. He's like, yeah, I was in Kazakhstan, walking through the warehouse, and I'm looking around. The guy's like, look at these bags, wall to wall, bags of Bayrite, right? And he's like, don't worry about that. We already recognize all the revenue. And JR was like, wait a minute. Okay, what about bill and hold? And the guy's like, what's that? Like, like no one knows what it is. And so anyhow, that's one of the reasons he brought it to me. Wow. And he was saying, I'm worried people are using this to manipulate the timing to meet their budgets. And that's exactly what it is. So that was the motivation that led to that bad policy in the first place.
Right.
The real fraud in my mind occurred when they knew it was wrong and they went through great lengths to cover it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I can understand screwing up and getting a bad policy in place. But after I raised the issue and brought it, they're like, yeah, this is wrong. We're going to stop doing it. And, we're going to get within the lines of what's appropriate. These are all things I was assured we were going to fix it. Right. Yeah. In fact, it was on my birthday in 2005. We had a big conference call when the chief accounting officer and J.R. Salt stood in front of the room saying, we're not going to do bill and hold anymore. We're going to fix it this quarter and so forth and so on.
So I just want to stop us before we get too far. It's like, so how did you kind of like formalize kind of your concerns, like when it came to the revenue recognition issue, and then how did it get to like this meeting that you were just describing?
Oh, because I drafted a memo, right? I drafted a memo saying, hey, here's what we're doing, and this is what we should be doing. And I laid out all the underlying facts circling the contracts, and we spent months because we had to get this right. And so that was kind of the impetus here. So at this time, I had already established a relationship because my job was work with the auditors, and I had a good relationship with the senior manager on the account. And I brought it to his attention. He's like, yeah, this is a big freaking deal. This is how they do recognizing revenue all across the globe. And I had warned him about my conversation with my boss. And we both said, oh, that's a tone at the top problem. Yeah, let's keep it. Because the plan was I would just issue my memo, right? And then they would have to deal with it, right? Because again, he said deal with this one contract. So I had an arrangement with the auditor, say, hey, I'm going to issue this one contract, just like he said, and very careful. I'm going to do all the work, but you guys are going to be on this distribution eventually, and you're going to have to say, well, wait a minute, does this call into question? I think obviously it does. So that was like a plan that we had agreed to. And strangest thing, right before I was about to send my memo out, right? I took it to him that day, and I said, hey, John, will you review my memo? Right. I just want to, before I send it out, and he's like, oh, I'd be happy to. Right. So he takes it, goes back to his auditor office, comes back a little while later, I don't know how long. He's like, oh, he said, Tony, this is a great memo. This might be one of the best memos I've ever seen. I have no comments. Like, it's really, really good. And I'm like, oh, well, thanks. And I'm like, that's reassuring. I'm glad. And then the weirdest thing happened. And then he goes, hold on a second. Right. Then he abruptly turns around, leaves my office, goes back to his office, and he comes back with something his hand printed out. And he's like, oh, I think you should see this or whatever. And I'm looking at it, and it has big KPMG logo across the top, and it says 2005 oil and gas conference, current topics, and so forth. And I'm like, what is this? He said, oh, well, you actually go to page 8 or whatever. And I go to page 8, and what is it? It's an article in this KPMG publication to the world of the industry. It says bill and hold transactions in the oil field service sector by John Christopher, right? And I'm looking at it. It basically mirrored my memo. Like, it just said it outlined all the gap and what they should be doing and why you don't recognize revenue, what companies should be doing and why they shouldn't be recognized revenue in this specific exact situation. I was just stunned. Like, why are you giving me this now? And this is what really got me. He said, I forgot about it.
Oh,
and I'm sitting here going, how? We've been talking about this for months. My team and I have been researching this for months, to put this memo together. You could have saved us a ton of time. And I don't understand.
Does that mean
this.
that he had an intern draft that article and
well, so let me tell you. So I really was stunned. I said, you have to explain this to me. And he said, well, the thing is, leading up to this conference, the national office wanted to publish this, and they reached out to us to come up with something on revenue recognition. And he said, we did. He said, he and Grant, the partner at the time, worked together, and they drafted this issue on revenue recognition industry and sent it to national office. But he said national office just crashed the whole thing. They just rewrote the whole thing, but they left his name on it.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Okay, and then I'm like, okay, fine, but did you even read it? Like, did you not realize that none of this was being done? And and then he just was despondent, and we knew that things were about to get even more serious at that point.
So how did they? So I'm assuming you're very blatant foreshadowing. Did things get worse from then? And how did they get worse?
Yeah. So immediately, I after issuing the memo, I got called into my boss's office, and the chief accounting officer, and he read me the riot act on the politics at Halliburton and the risks of putting things in email. Like, he basically said, okay, well, we've had a lot of discussions about it. Your conclusion's appropriate. Your memo's very good. But the problem is you sent it, and he's like, you used email. He's like, don't you understand email will get you in trouble, right? Anything you put in email is damaging. And these are his words, and that you need to be incredibly circumspect, in your position, especially your position. Don't put things in writing. So you're gonna have to, pick up the phone and take light notes and stuff. And he went on to say, yeah, even myself this morning, I had this issue and I started documenting email. I'm like, oh, I can't send that, So he's like, so there was that educational part of it.
Right.
But,
Well, and another educational part of it is that the word circumspect means careful to consider everything that I'm too dumb to know what that word means.
Yeah, look it up.
Yeah, Caleb, he's our thesaurus. Me, not so much. So careful to consider everything that might happen. Okay, so before you send an email, just go. Is there any way that this could come back to bite me in the ass? That's basically what bite the company in the ass, I guess, is what he's saying.
And so then he went on for a long time and wrote about the politics, and he was obviously very frustrated that the memo was out, because look, he's like, because your memo's out there, now we're gonna have to fix this, and he told me we were gonna fix it, and so at least I got some comfort in that, even though I knew it was pretty apparent that my days were numbered at that point, because he was
really,
very much
already.
yeah. But he told me
the memo was your long-term resignation letter, is what it was. Your inadvertent.
Well, I didn't want to resign.
18 months notice. Yeah.
But I had a feeling he was not going to be happy with it, because as I might have said earlier, he went to great lengths to tell me that I wasn't an auditor. Stop looking at past things. And when I raised this issue with him, he told me to stay out of it. Just do it, stick with whatever was done in the past. And so I really fully anticipated that he wasn't going to be happy with me. But at that point, what was more important to me was to get this right. To kind of, to force their hand, if you will, to kind of almost fix it. Right. I thought that was more important to me than my career or future at that company at that point. But I did leave that room thinking they're going to fix it. And it wasn't shortly thereafter that it was actually on my birthday when they, my boss, the chief accounting officer, and the vice president of the accounting for the ESG group, we had the staff meeting, and they announced to everybody that they're going to fix the bill in whole. We're no longer going to do it. Throw away that flow chart you guys were using, and so at that point, I felt like I was almost persona non grata in that point, but at the same time, I felt like, okay, yes, it's moving in the right direction, But then when they went out there to see how big the problem was, then they realized a correction would have required restating the financial statements and announcing to the public that they had this massive problem, and I guess that was a bridge too far for them, and then that gets me to my meeting with the senior manager again later on, after another month or so goes by.
Yeah,
and he tells me, we have a meeting tonight, and we're gonna discuss with them the restatement, and because we can't audit this stuff, and it's obviously not right. And I was like, oh, well, good. So I had still hanging around. They hadn't formally fired me yet, but I was still there. And
okay.
And I took that as still a positive thing. And
right.
But then the next morning, he comes into my office. His eyes are bloodshot. He's very distraught and upset. And obviously something happened. And he stood there for a moment, and then finally just said, he said, I can't believe I was at that meeting last night. I said, what happened at the meeting? He said, I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have been there. I wish I wasn't there. And finally he got around to tell me, he said, it was just a negotiation. He said it was a negotiation. They just negotiated the issue away. They're not going to fix it. No one's going to fix this. And so anyhow, if we kind of flash forward a little while to the company, the company goes ahead and covers up the accounting problem. They don't fix it.
Right.
And I eventually take my concerns to the SEC.
Okay.
All right. And the SEC, I sat with them, met with them, and my first meeting with them was very enlightening. Right. I was there several hours, right, going through everything, and the enforcement
with an
lawyer
attorney, or just solo?
No, I was just by myself.
Okay.
I didn't have an attorney, right? I was
okay. Yeah.
I mean,
which makes sense. How do you get an appointment with the SEC? Is there
I
you
sent
just
them a
contact
letter.
the front desk? What's that?
I just sent them an email, and interesting enough, they probably get thousands of emails.
Okay.
But they got mine, and within, I don't know, was it 24 hours or whatever, they reached out and said,
Okay.
well, we would like to fly you to Dallas to visit with
Perfect.
us.
There you
So,
go. So the SEC gets in, they take care of the problem. Halliburton changes what they're doing, and the world goes on just beautifully. Awesome. Well, it's been great talking to you, Tony. How can people?
I wish that was that. I believe that's how it was going to happen, right? And so I take them up on their offer. I fly to Fort Worth, and I go on a Saturday because I'm really friggin' nervous that someone at Halliburton might catch wind or someone might find out. So this is something I wanted absolutely nobody to know I was doing, right? This was a completely unique, unexpected experience for me. And
right.
You can imagine how I was feeling. And I get there, and they're very receptive. They're like, the attorney and the forensic accountant that we spent the day with, they were like, this is fraud. These are the type of cases, bill and hold. It wasn't complex, whatever. And I just told them everything. And then towards the end, the attorney kind of wised me up a little bit. At the time, I didn't understand what he was telling me, but he was like, just so you know, by the way, we're not going to be able to do a formal investigation, right? We're not going to be able to subpoena witnesses or subpoena documents. Really, we cannot do an investigation, even though we feel like this is something we want to pursue, but we can't unless we get approval from the commissioners.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I don't know why he was really telling me that at the time.
Yeah.
But of course, later on it would click, because what he was saying was the commissioners are political appointees, right? And it's made up of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And then the chairman is the presidential appointment, right? And if we know who was the president at the time, it was George Bush, and Dick Cheney was his vice president. And they had appointed a guy by the name of Chris Cox. And so I think he was flagging them to me that we're probably not going to be able to look into this, right?
He was hoping you'd connect the dots where it's like,
Yeah.
Our commissioner has to be okay with it, and you'd be like, oh, right, the guy who has lunch with Dick Cheney all the time. Okay, gotcha.
And then the guy said one other thing to me that really kind of shook me. He said, well, what do you think McCollum's, my boss, what do you think McCollum's going to say when he finds out this 35-year-old was in here, sharing this information with us?
He said that to you?
Like, and I just was floored. I was like, what? No, I hope he never finds out. And I'm like, are you guys going to tell him? I mean, I thought I studied this, and you guys were. And he's like, no, we're not going to. We won't. But, I'm like, okay, fine. And
just
so
hypothetical. I'm just wondering, would you shit your pants, or would it just be more of a close call kind of situation?
Yeah. So I leave there thinking, oh yeah, he's going to do their job and everything, but it takes time, right? I go back to work every day. I'm sitting there by the phone, waiting for checking the Google News, waiting for the story to drop, waiting for this to happen, and just kept going on and on and on, and then finally the company issues their annual financial statements. Well, they issued their earnings release, which locked them in, right? Publicly filed the financial statements. And the very next day that happened, the SEC contacted them and said, hey, by the way, we're opening up an informal investigation into these topics.
Okay.
And the only reason I knew it at the time was because I happened to be staying at the printer, and I heard the audit partner, his office was just right next, just 2 doors down from mine. And I heard him on the phone because his door was open. He's like, oh, we need to get on the phone with McCollum right away. This SEC investigating revenue recognition and this, that, and the other. And we need to get on the same page before we contact you. And I just heard all that. And I just went, oh shit, okay, it's happening. And then I catch wind that he's like, well, we need to give McCollum, I'll get on the same page before we get back to the audit committee and stuff. So I started feeling like, okay, well, maybe I should reach out to the audit committee, right? Because, and then that was something my wife absolutely did not want me to do, right? She's like, you can't trust anybody. And so originally that's why I didn't go to the audit committee. I went to the SEC first.
Right.
It was like, she was like, no way, you're not gonna be able to trust these guys. They're probably being on it. Nonetheless, once the SEC, once that came about, I was like, the audit committee's locked in. They have to fix this. So I felt comfortable sending them an email. And I followed, because I told you earlier that Sarbanes-Oxley requires public companies to have these confidential reporting lines. And so I said, by law, they have to protect my confidentiality and they have to do something with this. And you got the SEC looking over their shoulder, like, I don't have nothing to lose. And I sent an email, and next thing after sending it, I go into my wife and told her, and she just freaking blew up. Like, you're an idiot. Like, I can't believe you told me you weren't going to do that. You're going to regret it. And I'm like, no, they're going to fix it. No, you'll see, and, no, she was absolutely right. I go into office next day.
Which is ridiculous, because the audit committee was also a requirement that was set up by Sarbanes-Oxley specifically to be an independent part of the board of directors that would be their sole job is to make sure that the auditors are doing their job right, and that things like this don't happen. And so the whole point of the audit committee is for you to be able to do exactly what you did.
Absolutely.
And, but it's like you said, it's still pretty fresh in the timeline of Sarbanes-Oxley, and probably Halliburton wasn't the only company that hadn't gotten it right yet, but also your wife's her premonition that it wasn't set up correctly clearly was true.
Well, yeah. So I go back into the office, and I'm sitting there, later that afternoon. So ding, my computer rings. I got an email, and there, big as life in the email, says SEC investigation, to everybody in the organization. The SEC is investigating the allegations of, Anthony Menendez, your coworker, and get ready to preserve documents and evidence, and we're on, stuff's about to happen.
And so you walk out of your office, there's people like with crowbars, like slapping them against the palm of their hand, just waiting for you to use the printer again.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, it was actually, I was freaking floored. I was like, how is this possible? And I was in my office, and it was, I got up and I shut the door and I just sat there like, holy shit, what, thinking the worst, like what you were. And finally I just started grabbing all my stuff, and I just got out, walked out the door. And the funny thing is, when I opened, it wasn't funny, I guess, but when I opened the door, dead silence. There was no one on the floor. Normally it's bustling, and I was like, this can't be good. Like, and I'm walking around and nobody. I mean, it's just, and I just make my way out of the building, get in my truck, and I just spend the whole day just driving up and down I-10, like freaking out, like, what am I doing? What am I going to do? And
because Halliburton, I mean, again, this is me from the bleachers. It seems like Halliburton has an entire division that like specializes in shallow grave, like problem solving kind of situation. I mean, like legit. Was that how concerned were you? Like because again, I mean, were you at all concerned for your physical safety at all?
Oh, well, I mean, sure. I mean, I didn't, I've seen enough movies to know, stuff can happen.
Okay.
But it was fleeting. Like really at first I was so floored by it, and I was worried about it, especially once I talked to my attorney. Once I got an attorney, he's like, you need to assume you're being followed. You need to assume your phones are tapped. Everything's bugged, and don't talk to anybody. Like, he was really, and I started thinking, wow, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, and he's just like, you just be prepared. These companies will go to great lengths. And so all that had me for a while. And I'd worry about that, and worry about the safety, my safety or my family's. And then finally I just said, fuck it, I'm not going to live like this. I'm not going to be afraid of these guys. I did nothing wrong. I can't help, if that, in the event that something like that happened, screw it. I've done what I've done, and I'm gonna live with it. And but I'm not going to live my life being afraid. I'm not.
So
I'm not.
So the email goes out.
Yeah.
You're from that day forward, you're persona non grata at Halliburton.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what happens next?
Oh yeah. So for example, like, my job, I work every day with the auditors. Like, that was my job, and everybody else. And all of a sudden, the auditors basically flat out told the company, and this is strange, that they would not communicate with me in any way. They would not attend any meetings. if I was going to be in the meeting, and I would not. One auditor came by and it said, I came and stepped foot in your office, and they're all like, I'm not supposed to be talking to you, but I mean, it was very, very, very strange. And then everybody else just ignored me. Everything dried up. Like I started getting uninvited to meetings, and I mean, it just became obvious. And so finally
sitting in the cafeteria all by yourself at a table with your tray of food and your carton of milk. I remember 5th grade. I know.
Yeah. This was that on steroids, I guess. It was just, it was very unsettling. And then finally I was like, this is not right. Like, I want to cooperate. I want to help the audit committee and help the SEC, but I shouldn't have to freaking come to this office every day and be subjected to this, like not have a job or nothing,
be ostracized.
Yeah. So, my attorney ended up talking to Halliburton, and they said, oh, well, you go on administrative leave. And so my job was, I go to my attorney's office every day. Like that's what I did to pretend I still had a job. I'd go to his office and I'd work in his attic, and I would, but I was working, like I was preparing for my case. I spent every waking moment studying Sarbanes-Oxley, studying SEC. I was burying myself in making a documented timeline of everything that happened, and I was just gearing up for when the SEC came calling. I would say, here it is. I had boxes of documents. I mean, I had my computer. I mean, I was just working my ass off trying to get ready for what I was thinking was going to come to play out.
Yeah. And so the SEC, they came and they cleaned everything up, and you got to get out of your attorney's attic and back to work. And there was a parade for you, and everybody apologized, and there was a cake, and right?
No, it didn't work out the way in my mind, I thought all that stuff was going to happen. I was naive like that, but what happened was the SEC just abdicated the responsibility. They didn't do an investigation. They just turned around and said, hey, Halliburton, investigate yourself.
Oh
yeah.
Because that works. That always works out right.
It's always,
I think.
Yes. Always works out great.
So they just said, you guys investigate yourself. Tell us how it goes. And Halliburton
how it goes.
Halliburton hired this white shoe law firm from Washington D.C. and they
hey Colombian drug cartel, it's the DEA here. We were just if you just send some people around to see if you got any drugs on your premises, and then just let us know if you do. That'd be great.
That'd be great. Yeah, that's funny. But so they never did an investigation. They never interviewed anybody. They never looked at documents. They never even talked to me again. They the Halliburton's audit committee hired these attorneys that came in and then after 6 or 7 or 8 months or whatever it was, gave the ring the SEC and said, hey, there's nothing here. And they're like, okay, thanks for doing the work. Boom. And then that was it.
I really thought that's where the story was going to turn. I thought this internal investigation, like that's where it was going to turn, but no,
unfortunately not.
And the SEC never contacted you, and you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with all these bankers' boxes of notes and timelines and Sarbanes-Oxley research that I've been doing? So you just lit them on fire in a parking lot?
Absolutely. Well, no, not quite. But so obviously immediately my attorney called, well, what kind of investigation is this? You didn't do an investigation. You didn't even bother talking to our client. You're the whistleblower. You didn't do anything. And they just kind of kept mum about it. They admitted, and then finally like, oh yeah, well, we'll meet with him. And then by that time I'm like, are you serious? And this was many months later. And so eventually I did meet with him again. I had a follow-up with them. And this was very interesting because going into it, remember you had asked if I had an attorney the first time, and I didn't. I mean, I was like, what do I got? I'm doing the right thing here. I don't need an attorney. I don't have money for that shit anyhow. And so this time I'm like, there's no way in hell I trust you guys. I'm not going to meet with you guys without an attorney. Right. Yeah. And I got to find the right one. And so I found a guy by the name of Wayne Secor, and he was and this guy was perfect for the job. He actually ran the SEC Fort Worth office for like 15 years. He was the guy who oversaw all the investigations and so forth, this process.
And are you, sorry to interrupt, but
Hmm?
are you still technically employed by Halliburton at this point?
No, at this point I had resigned.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
I had resigned. They had, so what had happened was the Halliburton said, oh, well, now that the SEC's not going to do an investigation and the Department of Labor doesn't think you have a case or whatever, and you can come back to work now. And I'm like, no thanks.
Pass.
Yeah. So I resigned and,
Okay.
I thought.
And-
See, I thought you'd like have this indefinite like administrative leave, still pulling in a paycheck, like the guy on Fight Club who
yeah, exactly.
who just worked that out, and then you're like, cool, I'll just be if you need me,
No.
I'll be in my attorney's attic.
No,
That
I
kind
was-
of thing for the.
I did beat myself up though. Like I maybe not physically, but emotionally,
Right.
I was that dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Gotcha.
pow, pow,
Gotcha.
pow.
Just beating the shit out of yourself.
Yeah.
I have that type of personality too. I get it.
Okay. So you resigned from Halliburton. You're taking a new meeting with the SEC. You're lawyered up this
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so how does that meeting go?
That means goes just well. So myself, Wayne, and another attorney with his office. His name was Corey, and we spent a couple of days going through all my boxes, looking at the evidence, because the idea and Wayne, he was being very like the enforcement guy he used to be, right? He was very probing and wanted to see stuff, right? And so the idea was take you guys with me, you're going to protect me, but try to encourage these guys to actually do something with the case, right?
Yeah.
And so we were totally prepared. We get there and we brought some documents and stuff, and so going into it, Wayne was like, "Man, I wish I had this case when I was there. Like this is what you kind of like you hope for, when you're in these kind of roles." And then we get there and I'm like, okay, it was, first of all, it was just two young staffers, right? So it was obviously strange. They were way at the far end of the table, and then we got going, and they're asking me, and they're just nodding their head, listening or whatever. And then finally, I'm like, did they tell you how big the number was? No, they just told us it was immaterial. Did they give you any information? No, they didn't give us any information. I said, did they tell you about what they call peel-offs? I started raising this. No, we never heard about any of that stuff. And I'm like, oh, well, here's documents, here's evidence right here. And I try to push it to them, like, no, it's not necessary. Kind of push it back to me.
Oh, geez.
And that happened like several times. I'm like, what do you mean? I got recordings of meetings where they're saying, yeah, the accounting is wrong. They're going to fix it. Here, you want that? No. We don't need to take anything or whatever. And this went on for a while, and it was just very disappointing. And then finally, Wayne's like, Tony, can you step out in the hall? I want to talk to these guys, right? And I'm like, sure. I go out in the hall. 15 minutes later, Wayne and his attorney with his firm come back out, and he's just like shaking his head. He said, I don't know what to tell you, but I guess I just got to tell you. He said, as long as Dick Cheney's the vice president of the United States, there's no way in hell they're going to touch this case. It doesn't matter what information you have, what you have to say, nothing. He said, it just doesn't matter. I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes that's the way it is. And I was just freaking, wow. Stunned.
Yeah.
Floored.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm like, I can't do anything more about the accounting, but what I can do is fight for my rights as a whistleblower, right?
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah.
violated my rights, and the Sarbanes-Oxley was supposed to be the promised land. It was supposed to protect people like me for doing my job, and that's all I was doing my job.
Yeah.
And
I
so
want
that's
to
when
I want to ask you about one thing before we get into the to the next phase of the case, but you just mentioned it briefly, but at some point you did record conversations that you had with your boss about
sure.
about the circumstances around
Sure.
the case.
Yeah.
And I don't think we had mentioned that before, but I mean, just can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, that was not an easy thing to do. And I wasn't, at the time of it, I was very nervous, and I didn't really, it wasn't really something I really wanted to do. But things were deadly serious, and I had a very strong suspicion that they were going to commit fraud and cover it up, and I was going to get fired. And so my wife was like, we need protection. You can't, they can't, if they fire you tomorrow, they could blame this all on you, and
Right.
And so really I just did it out of kind of self-preservation, and so I recorded a few meetings with them, and really it was, and you hear on there, right, it's they're this is where they're going on about the politics and so forth, but emails but clearly saying your accounting answer was right, we agree with you, we're going to fix it, right? So the evidence, that's really what I wanted to have in my back pocket, and the truth is I had hoped to never disclose the fact that I had those to anyone ever. Like I had hoped that was just
right,
break in case of emergency, worst case scenario, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even tell my attorneys I had them until very, very late in the process, when it was, at this point, it was so desperate. I said, I even kind of threw it out there to the attorneys. The SEC. I said, I got recordings of these meetings. Do you want that? And they're like, no, better not, But so I ended up, all those documents, everything I had, I used at my Sarbanes-Oxley trial, right? So that was used as evidence at my trial.
Okay, so tell us about that trial. Is that the whistleblower trial?
Yes.
Sarbanes-Oxley trial.
So
Okay.
I just want to be sure that's the next thing that happens, right? So you have this after that second meeting with the SEC, and it's clear that nothing's going to happen,
right?
So then,
so that's just gone. That's just done.
The accounting part's done.
So there's no, in terms of legal, legally convicted fraud, that never happens. That's just dropped and it's gone. And Halliburton is still billing Holden today, likely.
Oh yeah, that's my.
Okay.
I suspect completely. Yeah,
gotcha.
I think so.
Yeah. Allegedly, we'll say allegedly. Do we have to say
fine. allegedly?
I don't know if we have to say
probably.
Okay.
All right, let's say allegedly, but I mean, in my mind, it's synonymous with they freaking committed fraud. Like
okay, but that's done. So your hopes of an actual fraud investigation is gone. But But you're pursuing your whistleblower rights, because, like you said before, it's a crime to retaliate against a whistleblower.
Correct.
So now you're in court with Dick Cheney, and he goes to jail because of this. I forgot. No,
he did not. No one went to jail. And Dick Cheney, I never met him or anything. But so what happened was, and the accounting doesn't go away really, because as part of my whistleblower case, I had to, to be successful, I had to prove that I reasonably believed I provided the company was materially presenting false information. There was a fraud, right? So I had to, that was a big part of my case. So I had to prove in court of law they were committing fraud, or at least my belief was reasonable enough that they were committing fraud, that the courts would believe it, right? That was an element in my case. And so I pushed it at every aspect I could. So we get them in their depositions, and it's like, okay, well, what guidance did you use to say your accounting is okay? Well, there's none. Are you aware of any other companies doing it the way you're doing it? No, there's none of that. And
wait, so that was Halliburton's people saying that?
Yeah. There's just
on
no
the record.
support on the record, no support for what they're doing.
Christ.
Right. It's just the way they're doing it. And so, all that stuff is there. But at this point, again, the SEC's they've already said forget that a long time ago, right? So this goes on for years, right? So so it goes on. We have a trial, and this is all very important. We have a trial. We thought we just kicked their ass, to be honest. At least I did. Like every day, I was like, we're kicking their ass. Like, I'm going to win this thing. And my attorney was always putting on a good case, but you never know with these things, trying to temper my.
Yeah.
And about a year later, after the trial, we get the decision from the judge, and loser. Like he dismisses my case, and he dismisses it. He dismisses it. Then he dismisses it in such a way that's just unbelievably damaging to not just myself, but in the law itself, everything that Sarbanes-Oxley was designed to do.
Yeah.
For example, he reached the conclusion that sure, there was some retaliation. They retaliated against you had some adverse actions, you were isolated, these things happened to you. I'm not going to deny it. However, the reason they happened to you wasn't because you blew the whistle, it's because you were an agent of the SEC. You were an agent of the SEC who was actively investigating them. Think about that. Legally, factually, was I an agent of the SEC? Did I work for the SEC? I wish the SEC was doing an investigation. They were not.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, so the judge went to just extreme lengths to try to support Halliburton.
Because basically what he's saying is that would kick the legs out of any whistleblower protection at all. Is saying as soon as you blow the whistle, then you are now an agent of the company investigating it. So then of course bad things are going to happen to you. Then,
Absolutely.
Not as a whistleblower, but as a SEC mook, you're gonna get you're gonna be treated shitty. And it's like, so that basically take the teeth out of the entire law if that was the case.
Absolutely. But he says that's not enough. I don't want to do just that amount of damage. I want to do more damage. So what he ended up saying was that, hey, the fact that because what happened, I blew the whistle, and what happened, my email, I sent it to the audit committee, but it was intercepted by Halliburton Legal's department. And so instead of just sending it to the audit committee, they sent it to, the CFO and investor relations. It just got blown out. Right. So they did not protect my identity. And as a result of that, because once everybody knows you're the whistleblower, that's how, you can't retaliate against someone if you don't know they're a whistleblower. Like, you know what I'm saying? You can't use that.
Yeah. Of course.
So it's really in the company's best interest to not know who did it. But anyhow,
this judge wanted to see like a knife stuck in your tire through a note that said, "We did this because you're a whistleblower," and then he would have been like, "Okay, now you got retaliated because you're a whistleblower."
And it's not meant to be a hard standard to meet. Like, that's one of the easier elements of a whistleblower case is just, and usually it can be just temporal proximity. Like, hey, I went to the SEC here, you found out about it here, and this happened. This happened. Like, it's not meant to be tough. But he went well beyond that, and he said, well, that's just not retaliation. He said it's not retaliation because, in fact, because he said because Halliburton thought they were doing you a favor. He said that his testimony, my boss, the one who outed me at the trial, he said that, well, my attorney had asked me, he said, do you regret doing that? He said, well, I don't know if regret's the thing, but looking back, I probably shouldn't have done it or whatever. And then Halliburton, asked him, and he's like, well, I thought I was doing him a favor. He's like, when I said it, I thought I was doing him a favor. I thought he'd want to know that this investigation, you know what I'm saying?
Like that you were getting, because that you'd be getting the credit.
Yeah, exactly.
This guy, he's making all our lives miserable. Let's all give him a round of applause, and then a parade and a cake, right?
So the parade and the cake.
That's
right.
Meanwhile, no one talked to him, and he put people to investigate me, like whether or not I did anything, any violating whatever,
Jeez. Of course,
and in fact, he even testified at the trial that he would fire someone for going to the SEC. Think about that. Yes. So
that's not whistleblower retaliation.
Is that retaliation?
No, not at all. Yeah. He said if I would have known, I'd fire someone for giving information to the SEC.
Jeez.
So somehow the judge was able to discount all that and go, you know what? That I just don't feel like that's retaliation. So not only would a company be able to simply, isolate the whistleblower and retaliate, do these things to them under the notion that they're an SEC agent or whatever, they're a rat, right?
Right.
Or, on top of that, they don't even have to protect the confidentiality of their complaint.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a requirement, really, presumably. Like when Congress went through all that effort to put that in there, they didn't really mean it. Right. So.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
just kidding, guys. Just kidding, guys. You can ignore this law here.
Yeah.
And according to the case that set precedent, snitches v. stitches, you clearly can't do what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So this gets us to the next step here. I mean, I get that ruling and I'm just going through it like meticulous, like this is bullshit. I was angry. This is bullshit. How do you say this? And I was gearing up like for the appeal, and I had a great attorney at the trial. Like Joe was fantastic. He was just lights out, right? And so the next Monday I got my write up my handout, my markings, everything. I go to meet with him. I'm like, all right, what are we gonna do? Let's get this appeal going. He just screwed up. And
okay.
and then that's when we had he's like, well, let's step back. He said, he's like, I hate to say it, but it's the end of the road. He said, no one, he said, we put on a good case, we put on a good fight. I thought we should have won. The ruling was bunk, but the fact is, on appeal, there's no way. Like he said, because not only you're gonna you have to defeat Halliburton kind of in that process, but also the judge, right?
Oh, you're right.
So those appeals courts are always going to put a bunch of deference to the judge, and so it's just like, it's just not worth it at this point. And I was left with nothing left to lose, and I'm like, can I just do this myself, right? And he's like, well, yeah, if anybody can do it, you can. So screw it, I'll do this myself. And so I
mean, come on, if Charles Manson can defend himself in court, then you can.
Yeah, exactly. So I just so I started doing it. I just threw myself into it. I pulled on everything I could, started writing, drafting, and getting prepared to file this appeal. I filed the appeal and had to go back and forth with Halliburton for over a couple of years as this thing played out. I'd file my brief, they'd file theirs, and go back and forth, and this entire process over a few years. And then it was finally, so if you think about that conversation with Joe was in 2007, and it wasn't until September 2011 that, after all my appeal efforts, that's when I got kind of my first victory, right? It wasn't it was a full-blown victory, right? Because the appeals court sided with me. They said, hey, yeah.
So you represented yourself on the appeal.
Yeah.
And they sided with you?
Yes.
You're the first. Okay. So you're saying you're the first non-crazy person to represent themselves in a court of law.
I wouldn't go that far. I might be crazy, but
okay. You're right. In some respects. And then also, they sided with you. You won too. How did you not win though?
With a caveat. So what they did was they said, all right, well, they affirmed it, reversed it, and remanded it. Okay, so let me kind of explain. So they affirmed it, right, saying that I did engage in protected activity. That's one element of the case, right? So there's 3 elements. So they said, yeah, you engaged in protected activity. That means you blew the whistle. We agree with that. We agree with the lower court judge. And then they reversed the judge on retaliation. They said, no reasonable chief accounting officer would think outing the whistleblower would be welcomed and so forth. And they said, no, obviously this guy was retaliated against. Right.
Okay, good.
And so then he sent it back to the judge because he said, well, since you didn't find that he was retaliated against, right, and we do, now you have to rule on whether or not Halliburton can defend itself from that retaliation. Like, can Halliburton put up an argument? Can they make a defense that what they did to you wasn't retaliation? Right. So I had to go back to him. And then on top of that, the court said, well, and while you're there, if you rule that they did retaliate, you have to find a damage award for Menendez. Right. Because he didn't do that in the first time. So that's how it went back.
Okay.
And so it goes back to the lower court again. And of course, he's going to just see the writing on the wall and rule in my favor. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
No.
Oh, no.
I was playing the role of you there for a moment.
Oh, that was my line. You took my line.
That's a page out of Craig's book right there.
Okay.
So no, of course he didn't. Of course he
well played, Mr. Menendez. Well played.
Of course he took the opportunity to stretch everything in Halliburton's favor, and he said, well, you know what, Halliburton, they had a legitimate defense, right? He said that they proved by clear and convincing evidence that they had a legitimate business reason for outing Mr. Menendez and everything that followed. And what was that? What did he hang his defense of his argument on? Well, one, that again, that according to my boss, he didn't mean to hurt me. Like, he was trying to help me. And then 2, they had to tell everybody it was me, because how else could they ensure that everyone's going to retain their documents? Right. So they were telling the organization, hey, the SEC is doing an investigation. You got to retain all your documents. And so their argument was, well, if they didn't know that I blew the whistle, that I was the person that blew the whistle, they wouldn't retain all their documents. Think about how asinine that is.
That's very asinine.
Don't you think that just the SEC inquiry alone, telling the SEC you don't need to know the whistleblower name, right?
Yeah, no, that's
So
because they're like, we'll keep all of our documents, but I don't know if this stuff from Menendez is stuff I need to keep.
No.
When they say keep all of your documents, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
weird.
Or
Yeah.
wait a minute, I'm not keeping my documents. They didn't even tell me who the whistleblower is. Maybe if they told me who blew the whistle, I'd keep my documents. Right.
Right.
So I need to know who
All
it
bullshit.
is before I start keeping documents.
All bullshit.
So you total bullshit. And so, I think at this point, the lower court judge even realized this isn't going to survive on appeal. Right. So then he did something extraordinary. He said, well, so that's my one ruling, is that Halliburton had a legitimate defense and I dismiss his case again. But in the alternative, like to save everybody time, I'll go ahead and entertain the idea that he was retaliated against. Right. Just because if you guys don't agree with me, why come back here again? So in the alternative, I'll entertain that he was retaliated against. And then the next thing he had to do was find damages. How much was he going to award me for the suffering, pain and suffering or whatever, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to award the guy $1,000. And
Jesus Christ.
And then he made his reason for that. And he said, well, the reason I think $1,000 is because that's all he asked for. Right. So I'll get back to that. He said he only asked for $1,000. So that must be the only damages the guy has, $1,000.
Okay.
But assuming that the court was probably going to overrule him again, he said, but if you don't like the $1,000, I'd give him a $30,000. Right.
Okay.
So choose your own adventure, appeals court. Like, what do you want to do? Right.
Okay.
So it goes back to them. So this is important because, so it goes back to the appeals court. Appeals court once again dismisses him and finds him in my favor and says, now we're done here. It was retaliation. And they said, give him $30,000.
Okay.
Right. And,
which feels like chump change even there. I mean, $1,000 very much feels like chump change. That feels like feels offensive.
Yeah.
$30,000 it only doesn't feel offensive when you compare it to $1,000.
That's right. But this is important because, why was it $1,000? And because that's all I asked for, because throughout this whole thing, Halliburton would use anything against me. Right. So if I was to say, oh, I want a bunch of money, they would just say, look, he's a greedy son of a bitch. He just he's just doing this for the money and so forth and so on. And so I wanted to just nip that in the bud. I mean, I could use the money or whatever. I didn't have a bunch of money, but I didn't want it to be about money. And so that's why I only asked for $1,000. And so anyhow, so we think it's over, right? I won. Yeah. And
it is, right? And then you take your $30,000 and you pay half of it to your attorney because it's on contingency. Then you have to pay taxes on the other. So you're left with $10,000. What do you do? Get cheese on your Whopper? I don't know what somebody does with $10,000.
Yeah, no, I couldn't do anything with it yet because they appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Okay,
Halliburton.
Halliburton did.
Yeah, they
over
were
$30,000. I guess
over $30,000. Yeah, and I can only imagine how much money they had to spend on this over 10 years. They had some of the probably most expensive attorneys in this area of the law that they could buy. But anyhow, so they appeal, and of course the Fifth Circuit is notoriously conservative. Right. Mm-hmm. Very business friendly. And so, but we still felt confident because it seemed like a rock solid case. Like it's, you can see it. And, so eventually a few years later, I guess, now we're into late 2014, right? Because if you think about time, this all started in early 2005, February 2005. Now we're in 2014 and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rules in my favor. And they say, he was retaliated against. And they kind of, at that point, it was codified as law. Like, so it did set precedent from there.
Good.
And it has, and because of all that, has had a positive effect on the law in a couple key respects. One of them has effectively lowered the bar on what's retaliation, right? Because before my case, retaliation had to be very specific. They had to fire you, demote you, like some very tangible thing, right?
Yeah.
Not give you the job or something like that. So any of these other things that they could really, the myriad of unlimited amount of things they could do to someone to, in part of retaliation didn't cover. So, but it did. So changed that. And then the other thing it changed was it provided for non-compensatory damages. which was a contention. Everyone always thought, oh, the only money you can get is get your job back, or if you were fired, so it has to be kind of along those same lines.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why, so all of that was kind of changed from my case. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you what my chances were to actually prevailing. Because when Sarbanes-Oxley was first introduced, I had said how legal scholars and academics and news media and everybody praised it as the promised land, right? This will help prevent another Enron and catastrophe, and the whistleblower's life's going to get a lot easier and so forth. But let me give you some statistics, because the law was passed in 2002. And by December 3rd, 2011, there were 1,237 employees who filed whistleblower cases. 1,237.
Who filed cases?
Of those, that filed Sarbanes-Oxley cases. Guess out of that number, how many have won?
One, and it was you.
It's
and we got you on our podcast. Hell yeah.
There's 23. But
well,
think about
still
that.
pretty close. There's only 22 other. Holy crap. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
Isn't it? It's just absolutely sad.
Like what is that? I mean, I'm no accountant, but that's like less than 1.5%.
It's pretty small.
Yep.
Yeah.
Less than 2%.
Yeah. So I think what we were seeing was just a rampant kind of almost disregard for what SOX was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And so, and the funny thing is, or not, it was not funny, I guess. I just stop saying that, but the law was well written, right? The law no one rewrote the law between the time it started and the time I won. It's just you had different people interpreting and adjudicating the cases, right? So you had an administration and a series of judges that, I mean, really just probably would easily side with, business over employees. And there's just no way someone could tell me that 23 out of 1,300 people are just nut jobs, right?
Right.
I mean, it's probably it's a little higher than that.
Yeah.
Or
so
not
Tony,
nut jobs.
in the aftermath of all this, so I mean, you landed on your feet. It took a long time.
Yeah, sure.
But you landed on your feet, right? You ended up at General Motors for a while.
Yeah.
Like when did that happen? And can you just kind of briefly kind of talk about how you, I don't know. Yeah. The aftermath of it all. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, so when I resigned from Halliburton, I didn't know what I was going to do. Right. I didn't have any luck getting a regular job. I applied, and the whistleblower thing would almost always come up. And finally I said, I gotta retool here. I gotta find out, I have this skill set, I have talents, I have experience, and so I was searching around, and I saw on the ACFE, Association Certified Fraud Examiner. So let me give this stuff a try, and I took that exam, passed it, and then I just looked for opportunities, and fortunately I landed some really good ones. I became a forensic litigation expert. I worked with some nice, really good law firms out of here in Southern California that would handle shareholder class action and derivative cases involving accounting fraud and accounting malpractice and our securities violations. And I just love the work. And on top of that, I was doing a lot of, I would travel the globe teaching US GAAP and SEC reporting and stuff like that. So there was a couple of years I was really thriving. Like it was really, I mean, in terms of, I seem to be getting past some of the stuff, but in the background, my case always lingered. But then we had the Great Recession in 2008, which really kind of upended everything. Like all of a sudden, everything changed. Like, so all my, for the next entire year out, all my training opportunities were just canceled, right? Companies were cutting back, saying, we got to cut back on costs. And the law firms I was doing the work for started cutting back too. Because I mean, again, no one knew, were we ever coming out of this? Was it going to get worse? Right. So, and all of a sudden I found myself with very little to do, little opportunity, or our savings was dwindling. And I'm like, shit, I gotta get a real job. And, but who was hiring during the Great Recession? Right. And there was one company that was hiring by the name of General Motors. right? So this was in 2009, and so I applied and got an interview, and as you have to understand, this is the one company in the country whose future was probably as uncertain as mine, right?
Right.
They had
Right.
just filed bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Their future was, the whole idea was, are they going to come out of this? What was going to happen? And so they were really ramping up, hiring people to kind of help try to make it out of that, reconstitute themselves or whatever, get out of bankruptcy, file an IPO. And so we lived in Texas, and this would require a move to Michigan. And so when I went to my interview at the chief accounting officer there, and because anytime I interviewed before, as soon as I brought up Halliburton, the door was shut. So I was like, I'm not, we got to be up front here. Who you're interviewing, and what I've been through. And I shared my experience with Nick Cypress, and he just ate it up. He's like that.
Oh.
That's commendable. That's good stuff. And he's like, that's the kind of person I need around here, for what we're doing. And he, hired me, and
because he wanted to make sure that General Motors was using correct accounting principles. And then when you showed him that they weren't, then he said, hey, screw you, sit in your office. That's not what we hired you for. We just want you to be a pretty face and make it look like we care about this. And that's the value that you bring to organizations.
Typically, but this was a little different because they had gone into bankruptcy. We were coming out fresh. Okay. So it was a fresh start, right? There was there were no skeletons in the closet here, right? It was like, let's get new policies, let's file an IPO. So it was very, very, very forward looking, right? So he didn't, he had every interest from his perspective had to be, let's just make sure everything is right as can be. I want this to be totally above reproach. So I happened to be really good for that at that time. And
good.
And so anyhow, I took the job, and it was a great experience. And I guess I stayed there. And then finally, in late 2015 or sometime in 2015, when the story broke about my winning my case and stuff, the ProPublica article, and then everything kind of changed. All of a sudden, I started getting all these opportunities to speak at universities and organizations, and and going around to speak at these universities. It just is it was very rewarding. And so one place I came out here to LMU. That was one of the first places I went to. They invited me out here as part of this distinguished speaker series. And I came out here, I was like, wow, this is Shangri-La. This is beautiful. And as I shared my experience, at various settings or whatever, the students just ate it up. And I was like, this is great. Could this be a job? This is a job for people. This is where you go to work every day. And so it just got me thinking, I want to do this. And in the back of my mind, I kind of always wanted to be a professor. I'm not gonna lie. I always thought that would be really cool, but I didn't know it was ever possible.
Yeah,
so finally, I said, all right, I'm leaving General Motors. I just said, all right, I'm done here. I left General Motors. I went back and got my graduate school, got my graduate degree. I rang over here to LMU. I asked Larry Calvers if he'd be a reference for me, and he said, more than that, would you want to come here? And I was like, oh, absolutely. That'd be too perfect. And so here I am now. So now I'm a professor. I share my experience with the students here, and I still speak various places or whatever to other schools and stuff. And it's the best job I ever had. It's very rewarding.
Awesome. And your big message is, if you are looking for the hardest way to earn $30,000, follow in my footsteps. And that's really the message. We want to, Tony, thank you so much for coming, for being on the podcast, for sharing this amazing story, and not just an amazing story, but one that really goes a different direction from this. Because usually we usually do cases of frauds that get where people get convicted and go to jail and stuff. Yeah. So this is such a different look at it, and also from the insider's look. So thank you so much for giving us and giving our listeners that perspective. We appreciate it a ton. If somebody wants to reach out to you, where's a good place for them to find you?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. Yeah. Gotcha. I'm not the most active LinkedIn person, but it is very accessible.
But no, like I'm asking, what's your physical address? Because there's some Halliburton goons that I think are actually.
Oh yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's
I'll not.
14. Okay, I'll just say it's 1418 West Western Street. It's a weird address in Los Angeles. You can find the zip code online. Thank you. Thanks again, man, for coming.
right.
We appreciate it
Thank you,
so
guys.
much.
All right.
Thanks, Tony.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for this episode. And remember, accountants can't prevent forest fires, but we can record the depletion of timberlands according to generally accepted accounting principles.
And also remember, accelerating revenue recognition isn't even close to the worst thing that Halliburton has done.
And just as just to remind the listeners, if you please keep your eye out for Tony's book that's going to be dropping sometime in the future called A Pyrrhic Victory. So keep your eyes out for that, and help. He didn't get much money from the courts for blowing the whistle. Maybe he'll make a couple bucks off his book deal. If you want to drop us a line, send us an email at ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com. And Caleb, where can people find you out there on the internet?
You can find me on LinkedIn, / not a backslash. It's a // It's a slash of some kind.
Yeah.
Caleb Newquist. There's some slash purists out there. I know you're listening. Greg, you also are on the LinkedIn, are you not?
I am. Yeah. Look for me. I'm the bald guy with a beard and glasses named Greg Kyte, CPA.
Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kyte and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you listen on Earmark, get some free CPE if you listen.
Love
That's
the free
great.
CPE.
You bet. Join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say,
Oh my fraud.